And hello, everyone, and welcome again to the Disability Law Center of Virginia 2023 Disability Rights and Resources Summit. By way of introduction, my name is Susanna Clark. I am a Family Services Advisor for Medical Home Plus, and I will be the moderator for this session. My pronouns are she, her. I am a white female with super short blonde hair. And today I am wearing a navy blue sweater with navy blue circle drop earrings. As you know, the theme this year for the dLCV Summit is Breaking Barriers to Advance Access. And my panelists and I have been tasked to present two sessions. The first was IEP Essentials, which took place earlier this morning. If you were not able to attend that session but would like the information regarding the essentials of what an IEP is and how it is supposed to work when everything is working properly, you can refer back to that session once this summit has concluded and the recordings are provided for the participants. Additionally, I actually present that same workshop every Thursday at noon and 7 p.m. through Medical Home Plus. It is a free webinar and you can register for that at medhomeplus.org. Again, that is medhomeplus.org, and I will drop that website into the chat here in a few minutes. This, however, is our second session, and it will run from 11:30 to 12:30. And during this presentation, we will be discussing IEP Realities. The material will be presented interview style. I will be asking my co-panelists, Kate Flinn and Lindsey Dougherty, some important questions about their experiences with the IEP process, and they will share some great advice about what to do when things go awry. As with the first session, please feel free to drop questions into the chat during the presentation, and we will leave time at the end to answer them. We hope to get to all the questions you might have, but if you are unable to answer, if we are unable to answer your question, or you think of something later, you can feel free to email us. There will be a slide at the end of the presentation with our email addresses on them. But real quick, maybe Kate, Lindsey, and I, why don't we just drop our email addresses into the chat really quick, if that's okay? And then people can write them down in case they don't have time or in case they have to leave before the end of the session. All right, so thank you, Lindsey. But before we move on, I wanted to give both Kate and Lindsey an opportunity to introduce themselves. So Lindsey, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Good morning, everyone. Almost afternoon. My name is Lindsey Dougherty. My pronouns are she, her. I am a white woman with dark brown hair. It's pulled back in a ponytail for today's session. I have a dark green shirt on, and I have, you can't really see them sometimes, but silver dangly earrings that are in 3D shaped cubes. I am a mom to two wonderful kids, both of which have differing educational challenges, but I'm here today specifically to talk about my 12-year-old son, and some of his superpowers include dyslexia and ADHD.
Thank you, Lindsey. Kate, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Kate Flinn. I am a white woman with long blonde hair. I'm wearing brown glasses, and I don't think you can see it, but I have a gray shirt on that has some little blue and purple flowers on it. I have two children. One is 23, one is 15. Both are on the autism spectrum. The 23-year-old is practicing being independent now, which is interesting. And then the 15-year-old is in his third year of medical homebound, and I will talk about that a little bit later on. But they both have other challenges in addition to autism, including anxiety. One has ADHD, one has obsessive compulsive disorder. So I will talk a little bit more about that later on.
Awesome. Thank you both, Lindsey and Kate, for being here. I'm really excited to present what we prepared today. So again, this is going to be question and answer style, kind of interview style. And first, I'm going to start with Lindsey. Lindsey, why don't you tell us about your first IEP experience?
Sure. So my IEP experience relates a lot to the phrase that you actually used in the first session, and that you don't know what you don't know until you get to that point, and then all of a sudden things become clear, and then you continue to move forward. And so my son was identified in kindergarten in 2016 as having some reading and writing challenges. And so when we moved into his first grade year in Chesterfield County Schools in Virginia, I requested testing that would give us some answers on some of the things that we were seeing with his reading and writing difficulties. He also, during this time, had some fairly significant health issues that had come up. And so in 2017, as opposed to providing him with an IEP, the school offered a 504 plan to address some of the health concerns that we had, but none of the educational pieces that we were seeing. And the main reason we were given for that was because he was quote unquote too young for testing. And so some of the concerns that we had related to dyslexia. And so we were given a 504 plan and went for about a year on that plan. So then in second grade, I requested at the beginning of second grade year for testing, and was also told at that time that maybe we could do it later in the year, but that he was too young still for testing. Meanwhile, we were seeing fairly significant learning loss issues. And so in December of that year of second grade, we actually went out and got outside testing done because I was, as a parent, just really frustrated with kind of the timeline that the school kept pushing off. And then meanwhile, my child just was not able to learn in the way that his brain needed him to learn. And so with the outside testing report, I took that to the school, and then that then triggered the child find, and finally then we're able to get kind of the IEP official process underway. And the school then went through some of the same testing that had been done through the private provider, which took a lot of time. And then, you know, meetings happened throughout the second half of his second grade year. And finally, at the very end, it was the middle of May, we got his first IEP in place, and then school ended 2 weeks later. And so we went this summer, no services, nothing. And then his third grade year, we did have what I would consider now to be a very lackluster IEP. It addressed just the bare bones of some of the concerns that we had. And throughout his third grade year, which was the only year that he had a full IEP in place, we saw very minimal you know, improvements in the areas that we were concerned about. And so as everyone knows, in 2020, he went into fourth grade year, and there were some adjustments that were made to his IEP, and then COVID hit, and everything just fell off of the rails, not only for us, everyone across the county and across the country as far as special education services were concerned. And so I'll talk a little bit about the rest of our IEP journey through some of the other questions, but that was our first foray in it. And now that I'm multiple years past, multiple experiences, and talking with other families, there is a better way. A lot of times it requires a lot of fighting, you know, a lot of pushing for the school system, but it is possible to receive services in a shorter period of time that actually serve your student and helps them learn.
Right. Thank you for that, Lindsey. And that's the hard thing that all of us as parents go through to some degree or another, is that, like you said, we don't know what we don't know until we get into it. And that's why I'm always telling families, get as educated about the process as you possibly can and be persistent, because it makes a huge difference. And all of us, Lindsey, look back and have regrets about how our child's IEP process went. We just have to offer ourselves grace and move forward and keep trying. But that's why we're here. We're hoping to help other families maybe not have as many of those difficulties as many of us have had. So thank you for that, Lindsey. Kate, why don't you tell us about your first IEP experience?
Okay. Hi, everyone again. This is Kate. My oldest son, who I mentioned was 23, we had our first IEP experience when he was in first grade and he was 6 years old. He had already been diagnosed with ADHD and autism at the time, and the school was very well aware that he had these diagnoses when he started first grade. Another parent had, when I was telling her that the struggles that he was starting to show in school, she said, well, you should ask for an IEP meeting, but she didn't explain what that is. She just said, you need to ask for an IEP meeting. What we were seeing is that as he was progressing through first grade, the first couple of months, he was starting to get behavior reports from the bus. We were starting to get emails home from the teacher that he had to go to the assistant principal's office and sit to reflect and be in timeout, basically. And we were starting to see his self-esteem was plummeting because he kept, he was trying, he was doing his best, but he kept getting in trouble. So I requested an IEP meeting. Again, not knowing exactly what it was, just that this parent had recommended that I ask for that. So what happened is there was a team meeting, and this was probably in late September, early October, that there were several people there. I didn't know really who they were. And they gave me a behavior plan, or they gave him a behavior plan. So it was just one of those, papers taped to his desk that, if he gets a certain number of stickers, he gets, whatever treat. Totally inappropriate for his needs at the time. And again, I had no idea. We progressed through another month or so, and he is struggling so hard. We're sitting hours at a time trying to do homework. I'm reaching out to the teacher. I'm saying, you've got to help him. What can we do? I requested another IEP meeting. We meet again with this group of people. And again, they say, well, let's just change the behavior plan. That's probably all it is that's needed. The teacher had started making him sit out at recess to catch up on work that he wasn't able to do in class. And of course, a kid with ADHD needs to be able to run around. That's the one time of the day when he gets a break. So we continued to see his self-esteem plummeting. He's crying a lot at home, lots of behaviors that we hadn't seen before. I requested another meeting, but this is after January. So we came back from winter break. Third time, again, they tried to steer me towards a behavior plan. And of course, I knew by now this is something terribly wrong. This is not anything like what this parent had told me about. So I talked with the other parent, and she explained it more in detail and said, well, this is really what needs to be happening. And she gave me the name of an education advocate. And this person was amazing. And she read all the evaluations that we had gotten from the previous doctors who had diagnosed my son with autism and ADHD. She looked through, the behavior things that we were getting from the school. She was able to see that there were several areas that the school clearly, besides not giving me an IEP meeting or a child find, were seeing that these are the areas that he needed significant help with. So it was extremely helpful to know what an IEP was, to know that there's a progress to getting an IEP in place. And once we had the education advocate, she was in there. She was like a barracuda, but a nice barracuda. And we got this really great IEP.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And again, it just goes back to what we all seem to experience. We don't know what we don't know going into this. So that's why it's so important that all of you are here today, educating yourself as much as possible. So Lindsey, sometimes when a parent requests specific services or accommodations in their child's IEP, the school tells them there isn't enough staff or funding to offer that service. Tell us a little bit about your experience with this scenario and give us some advice about how you think parents should handle this roadblock.
Yes, and so I think that a lot of parents that I've spoken to throughout the last few years have similar stories to what I experienced. And just to give a little background, at least in Virginia, the school district's budget is set the prior year for the upcoming school year. And so that's, based on a snapshot in time about what they think the school system's needs are going to be. It is approved. The overall dollar amount is approved by the Board of Supervisors here, but then the school system takes that overall dollar amount and then decides how that's going to get allocated throughout the school system. And so when you have children who are identified for IEPs, after that dollar amount has been allocated, if the school system has not put enough money into special education services, and your child needs an occupational therapist, for example, and that therapist is not available for the school system or your school specifically, it can cause issues. But ultimately, what I'm here to tell families is that your child's education and their educational needs through their IEP are federally protected. And so it is incumbent upon the school system, and the school board to provide the services identified in that IEP for your child, whether they have them in that moment or not. And so it's really important for parents to feel comfortable pushing for written timelines for if it's not available, when you expect it to be available, and then also just follow up always in writing with not only your school, your school's IEP team, but also the principal of the school, and then CC school board members as well. Because unfortunately, in the special education world, it really does seem like the squeaky wheels get the grease, and it's very easy for school systems that are overburdened, understaffed, and underfunded to, let the needs of each individual student fall to the wayside. And that's not how it's supposed to be. But unfortunately, I feel like that is what has happened in our journey and many other families' journeys. And so never back down from advocating for your child. And I think that that is just like the common thread through my entire journey. I felt like I was doing it by myself for so long. I will talk a little bit later about bringing in an advocate towards or semi-recently to kind of help me advocate for my child, because again, not knowing what I didn't know, it turns out that the school system and what they were telling me and what was being provided for my child was not legal. And there were many opportunities for the school system to do right by me and my child. And they were, it felt like they were actively not doing that. And so I'll get into that a little bit later.
Perfect. And just to summarize what you just said, when a school said when a school says we don't have the staff for that, or we don't have the funding for that, neither of those are valid excuses not to put the appropriate accommodations or services onto a student's IEP that student needs. And I've been through this myself. My daughter needed an intervener. We went through a whole process of getting the school to agree to it and put it on the IEP. They said we don't have staff. They said we don't have funding, but we were able to get them to put it on the IEP. It did take an entire year, like you said about the funding, Lindsey. It took an entire year for them to actually find the appropriate person and have the funding to pay that person to be her intervener. But ultimately, we were successful, but that never would have happened if I hadn't been able to get them to put it on her IEP. So don't ever let a school give you that excuse if the resources or if the services on or accommodations on your child's IEP are what is appropriate for your student. Thank you, Lindsey. Okay, so Kate, tell us why it's important to keep detailed records of your child's educational progress.
Okay, this is Kate. I'm going to go back briefly to something that Susanna said in her previous presentation. She said, if it's not written, it doesn't exist. And that has been my guide star since this incident in first grade with my son. It's critical to remember that when you're dealing with your child's educational needs, especially with the school, documenting everything is what helps you build your case, that your child requires certain supports and accommodations that are needed to receive the education, the behavioral supports, the academics, the social that they need to learn, to be in school. So of course, I learned this with my older son's experience in first grade. And what I did is throughout that year, that terrible year, I bought a 4-inch 3-ring binder, which I actually have right here. So I'm going to show you how. I don't know if this is going to prove anything or not, but it's a big binder, okay? And what I did with that binder is I bought a index that it was basically a table of contents that had 26 letters, okay? And I filled this entire binder. I gave each one of the indices a name. So the very first one was, I called it the cast of characters, so I could keep track of the people that I was dealing with. And then the second one, I created my own acronym index. So that's how I could remember what FAPE was and IDEA was and all of that. So this is what I used throughout the whole process. And as I've gone along, dealing with my other child as well, with his IEPs. But the other tabs I dedicated to evaluations that my son had received, report cards, behavior notifications. I had a copy of the special ed regulations that I became intimately familiar with. Anything that I could use that documented what my son's challenges were at home, at school, in the community, on the bus. I had it all in there. I made hard copies of emails, communications between the teacher, the assistant principal, whoever I was talking to at the school. One of the things that I learned that teachers might give you a phone call and talk to you. What you do is you immediately, when you get off the phone, is you send an email and you summarize, this is what we just talked about. Did I get that right? And at least you have a document of what was said and what you talked about. So what I discovered is that after a while, this becomes just this body of evidence, basically is irrefutable proof of what the case you're trying to build to make the school see these issues that they need to be addressing and taking care of.
Yep, perfect. Thank you, Kate. The hard thing is that when we start out as parents, we oftentimes give the schools the benefit of the doubt and think, well, they have my child's best interest at heart. So, and they know what they're doing and I don't know what I'm doing. And so we're just, I'll just do whatever you want me to do. And we don't realize how important it is to be keeping track of what's happening all along the way. And just a big advice that I have for people, even if things aren't going wrong right now, even if they seem like they're going okay, just keep basic records of everything that's happening, because you don't ever know when you're going to need them. Just assume that someday you will, because we all run into problems with the IEP process, and keep track of the things that are going on. So thank you, Kate. All right, Lindsey, you have had an experience where you learned the importance of verifying your child's test scores. Talk about keeping records. I'm hoping you'll tell us about that experience and explain why it's so important for students to follow for schools to follow best practices for interpreting students' test scores.
Yes. So I'm just going to add on a little bit to what Kate said, and it flows into how I'm going to answer this question. It's also really important for parents to keep graded schoolwork that their children are doing in school, to be able to show across that year how they either have improved, haven't improved, and that became actually really important in the second half of our journey in our IEP. And so the second part of our journey included 4th and 5th grade year. We were doing at-home learning through 4th grade for COVID, and then back in school for 5th grade. And so the final breaking point for me in my child not receiving appropriate services was in 5th grade. And at this point, it had been 5 full years before that he had not been receiving appropriate teaching for the way that his brain needed to learn. And it was compounding in a lot of different, but really negative ways. And so at that point, I hired an advocate. I know that is not something that is available to a lot of parents, or you don't even realize that people out there exist that can kind of help you through that process. My advocate also was a lawyer for her day job. And so not only did she know kind of the process that the school should have gone through, she knew kind of the legal implications of what it meant for the school not going through the right processes. And so we then went through our second round of outside testing. This time through an IEE, which is and Susanna, you may have to actually tell me again what the acronym means.
So IEE, Independent Education Evaluation.
Yes, see, so even I still get all of these acronyms messed up. But so we went and had secondary outside testing since it was post-COVID and kind of just like the mental health care system collapsed across the country. There were no providers in our area that could provide the services. So I ended up having to drive my child over a long weekend up to Northern Virginia, who had an opening, and he provided the testing over this long weekend. It was very expensive, only a piece of which was reimbursed by the school for what they considered appropriate costs, which was not true again. So multiple layers of illegal things happening, but through that testing and through his review of all of our previous records, he identified that the school system had not provided confidence intervals for all the test scores that they had previously given my child. And so the way he explained that is that a confidence interval is how willing someone is to be wrong with the score that they're providing your child. And so, usually when your child's testing, they're in a semi-quiet environment where they have one-on-one interactions with the person providing the test, which is not indicative of a classroom, right? Usually if they're in general education, they have anywhere from 15 to 30 other kids in their class. It's a little bit chaotic. And so for my child who has ADHD, it wasn't an accurate representation of how he was learning in that environment. So the confidence interval essentially is just to provide a little bit of buffer to give parents, testers, and teachers the understanding that the classroom, is the general setting, and it's not necessarily the setting where the testing is. And so the child's responses to those questions will potentially be a little bit different depending on the setting, and you should give them a little bit of grace essentially in the scoring. And so when he brought that to our attention, it was immediately clear that my child had very conveniently scored just right above where more intensive services should have been provided to him. And if you had considered that confidence interval, that, him being in a classroom receiving these services potentially would have decreased his understanding of what was actually being taught to him, he should have been receiving more intensive services. And so through this entire process, we were able to get what I now consider to be kind of the Cadillac IEP. And it required 2 rounds of outside testing. It required an advocate to come in and tell the school system what they were doing wrong and why, backed up by a psychologist professional opinion on that. And then it was amazing the changes that happened. Everybody, our principals started attending our IEP meetings. Occasionally they brought their lawyer. And so it was just, everybody started paying a little bit more attention and were a little bit more interested in making sure that the process that we were going through was the right one. And so it's just sometimes helpful, even if it's just a parent who has gone through the process before, whether their children are having the same difficulties. It's just really important for someone else's eyes to be on your process and to give you recommendations, because it's not necessarily the way that it should be. And it's really frustrating for parents.
It is really frustrating. And the bottom line is that schools know what they're supposed to be doing. And, it's been mentioned before, there's a lot of students and things fall through the cracks, but I understand when I approach schools, I understand you have a lot going on, but it does not change the fact that these children have civil rights that must be honored. Education is a civil right. And so as parents, if we know when things are not going well, when we know, when we can point those things out, we are more able to hold schools accountable. And, somebody asked a question about that and we can address that at the end. But thank you, Lindsey, very much. And again, I'm so sorry that you guys had to go through all of that to get your child what he needed. Okay, Kate, so tell us what 2E or twice exceptional means and explain why it's detrimental for 2E students when they are not identified as such.
Okay, thank you, Susanna. This is Kate. So as Susanna said, 2E means twice exceptional. And what twice exceptional is that your child has been identified as both with a special need or with a disability and is gifted, so that when they have tested academically, they have shown that they are maybe at a grade level, above grade level. Academically, they might be more able to conceptualize, ideas and critical thinking that compared to their peers might make them look like they are advanced. So both of my children were tested for gifted when they were in the second grade. My oldest one, the 23-year-old, when he was tested, he was a few points shy of what the threshold was to receive gifted services. I later found out that he was not given accommodations when he was tested for his ADHD. But as he was progressing through second grade and third grade, and his struggles were becoming more obvious even with the accommodations and the services that he had in his IEP, we think that it was the best that he was not in a center-based gifted, because at least in Chesterfield, where I live, what the gifted services look like, they really focus primarily on the academics of English and math and some science and history, but it's accelerated. There's definitely some enrichment at the gifted level of these classes and these subjects, but it's accelerated, so the pace is faster. And for somebody with processing speed deficits like my son, who, his IQ might have been very, very high, but his processing speed was much slower. So it took him a while. It seems like he's pondering thoughts, and he is. It's just, it's taken him a while to think of the thoughts and the ideas. So for him, even if he had been in a gifted program, the way it's set up in our county, it would have been a real challenge to get him the gifted services that he needed at his processing speed level. My second child, my youngest one, was also tested for gifted in second grade and was placed into what's called a center-based gifted program. And this is before he was identified with autism. When he was in the program, he started that in third grade. Center-based gifted means that you go to the program, that the children were actually bused to a program that was not at their home school. There's also what's called school-based gifted, which is you're basically receiving enrichment in the school, in the classroom at your home school. As my son progressed through, he was in the center-based gifted program for 6 years, so from third grade through eighth grade. And as he progressed, and as we started to see that he was definitely showing signs of autism, he was identified in fifth grade with autism, still in the center-based gifted program. But academically, he was capable, but now socially and behaviorally, he was starting to decline and have a lot of trouble at school. So he made it through most of sixth grade. Then, of course, March 2020, that's when the schools went to virtual for COVID. He continued with the gifted program, but then he stayed on virtual all through seventh grade. So it was very hard to tell if he would have received, if he'd been in the school setting, if he would have received the gifted programming and the special ed program that he needed. But in our experience, he was only receiving one or the other. So my oldest son was receiving the special ed, my youngest one was receiving gifted, and there was really not much of an overlap between the two. I did discover, I was on the Virginia Department of Education website this morning, and I discovered that they have a toolkit that was created in 2022, last fall, for supporting twice exceptional students, which is a big help, because back years ago when I was looking, there was nothing. There was a mention of twice exceptional, but there was nothing to support twice exceptional. So I'm hoping that going forward, this is something that is going to be helpful to school systems across the state.
Right, because historically, unfortunately, it was assumed that if a child had disability, well, I'll say it the other way, if a child was gifted academically, that there's no way that they would need an IEP, or vice versa. If your child has an IEP, they couldn't possibly be, have an IIQ, which is absurd, right? So many students who have challenges, who have disabilities, also can perform at a very high level academically. And if we don't get the supports in place through an IEP, they can't reach their potential academically that they otherwise could if they had those supports in place. And so I love that that's now on the VDOE website, and that's something that we should all be aware of. And I really hope that regulations change in regard to 2E and it becomes something that is more prominently addressed in this process, because I know a lot of families struggle to get schools to pay attention to this issue. Okay, Lindsey, I'm going to ask you a question that might sound obvious, but we're just going to go there, and I want you to, give me your answer. Are grades a good measure for whether or not a student needs an IEP? Why or why not?
No. Just like full stop, no, but then I'll give you my long answer. So what was really interesting to me, looking back through our process, was part of my argument for my child needing an IEP was that his grades were really, really bad. He struggled with reading, he struggled with writing, and I mean, that goes across all subjects in school. And so when you struggle with those things, your grades are going to reflect that. And so through our 504 plan, but then with our lackluster IEP initially, miraculously, my child's grades slowly started to improve from his teacher. But then what I wasn't seeing was that there were any changes to the work that he was bringing home. And so then that's where keeping your child's work, pieces of it, I didn't keep all of it, but pieces of it that show either non-improvement or improvement is a really great indication about, whether the services the school are providing are actually serving your child. And so what I think was really kind of like the most obvious thing when we went into 5th grade with our advocate, she recommended that I bring the work with me. I took it in and I asked the special education team and the principal, I said, does this look like a 5th grader completed this? And the answer around the room was no. And so I said, I really find a huge disconnect between the fact that my child's work does not reflect a 5th grader level reading or writing. On top of that, he has failed almost every single, or no, at that point he had failed every single SOL from 3rd grade on. And then on top of that, I, honestly, outside of the grades changing, wasn't seeing an improvement in his work. And so I, think that the school was hoping that, by him bringing home mostly B's and C's, that would kind of placate me. But the reality was that he wasn't being served, and his actual ability to learn was not improving. And so when, I brought that to them, they asked to make copies, and I said, absolutely, you guys should have already had copies since he completed this at school, but please make copies, keep it in his file, and just know that this is what we're going to actually be using when we're looking at whether he is improving educationally or not his grades. And so again, as a parent, do not hesitate to push back on that narrative from the school system, because my child could have been an exceptional student, and he only just needed to be taught in the way that he can learn. And it is a narrative that I've heard over and over again, and it's not correct.
I hear this narrative so often that as an advocate, I keep a quote right here on my wall that I pull down in the middle of IEP meetings, and I share it. And the quote comes from the first paragraph of page 20 of the Virginia Department of Education's Supplemental Guide for Evaluation and Eligibility in Special Education. And this is what it says. Although academic progress is one focus of school, groups should not consider grades or academic achievement to be the only demonstration of adverse impact on educational performance. And then it just goes on to talk about all of the ways in which a student can need an IEP or need special education services, even if they have good grades. So it comes straight from the VDOE website. That's where we can find the support for that argument. So don't ever let a school tell you your child has good grades, they don't need an IEP, they don't need support and services. Right. Thank you very much, Lindsey. Kate, tell us about what you have personally observed regarding a conflict of interest that can sometimes exist when seeking support from the Virginia Department of Education. What do you think we can do when we come up against such scenarios?
Okay, so to answer, this is Kate. To answer this question, I'm going to have to give a little bit of background. This has to do with my second child, my 15-year-old. when schools, back in March 2020, when schools went to virtual, he finished up 6th grade and virtual. He went through 7th grade virtual also, because we have a family member who's immunocompromised, and we were very concerned about her health and safety. So by then he'd been at home for over a year and was very eager to get started, go back to school in 8th grade. But in this time, because he also was, because of his autism, he was having a hard time finding friends and making social connections. So he was pretty alone. I mean, he had one small friend group that he had kind of maintained contact with, but after a while that fell apart. So we were excited for him to start school again, be in person, and start seeing other kids. He made it through the first 4 days of 8th grade, and his anxiety was so high at this point that he ended up having to go on medical homebound for the rest of 8th grade. So now this put him at a little over 2 years that he had been isolated at home from being around peers. And I was very concerned about how his mental health was being affected by not being around other people, other kids his age. So when we started the transition to high school, and we were in the IEP meetings starting in April and May of that year of 2022, I made it very clear that I wanted him to be in person, but because of the anxieties and some of the phobias he had developed, he couldn't be in a large school setting. This was very clear. This was documented. We had information from his psychiatrist, from his doctors. So again, document all of this. I mentioned the magic phrase, private placement. Perhaps we should consider that. And immediately a person was brought into the IEP meeting called the compliance specialist. I had no idea. I had never heard about this person before, but when this person came to the IEP meeting, it's basically that she took over, and it felt like it was a one-man show with her in charge. What happened is that it feels like her only job was to tell us no, was to just be, you can't have this, you can't have that. And after a while dealing with her, it felt like she was not listening to us. She wouldn't listen to my son when he would say that these are problems that he's having. And she finally suggested, it looks like we're just at an impasse. We need to talk to VDOE and get a mediator. And I said, fine. We found a mediator. We both had to apply for a mediator. We were given one. We ended up having 3 sessions with the mediator over the summer, the same mediator. And every time it was an impasse. We could not agree to what I wanted and what she wanted were very different things. So we started the school year, and I'm again documenting everything. We started the school year, and my son, who had made it very clear he can't be in a large school setting, they insisted, well, let him try and fail was their motto. He agreed. He got in the car with me. We drove to the school. He saw all the kids, and he shut down. He couldn't get out of the car. He couldn't go into school. The autism teacher came out to meet us, and she saw this. She saw it. So they had their data that he could not get out of the car or go into school. Still, this compliance specialist refused to talk to us, refused to listen, to talk about private placement or another what would be a least restrictive environment for him. So she said, why don't we have a facilitated IEP meeting? So all of these things were through VDOE. We had the 3 mediated meetings with VDOE mediator. We had 2 facilitated IEP meetings. And by now I had gotten to the point where I had to file a complaint with VDOE. So I filed a very detailed complaint. I made copies of everything. I sent it in. I also sent it to his high school, and I said, I want this in his file. It was huge. It was another almost 4-inch binder full of stuff at this point. What happened is VDOE, it took them about a month. They had to look through all of the evidence. They had to present the evidence to CCPS, Chesterfield County. Chesterfield County had to rebut whatever they said. The eventual findings were that out of the several items that I made complaints about, they did find that Chesterfield County was out of compliance in the way that they were writing their prior written notices. And so what that meant is that VDOE forced the compliance specialist, she had to write an email to all the principals and all the special ed coordinators in Chesterfield County and say, this is the mandate, is this is how you have to write IEPs, prior written notices going forward. So small victory out of that whole thing. And I'm happy about that. And I'm glad that it affected all kids in Chesterfield County with the IEPs. So.
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And that's the hard thing, because sometimes when we need extra support from VDOE, like with you with the mediated, IEP meetings, but then when there were issues, you were also filing the complaint with VDOE. And so it just feels like there's a conflict of interest there, and it's hard to feel confident in that process. And that isn't to be shared in order to discourage anybody in that process. It's just something to be aware of. Thankfully, at the end of that, from your list of complaints, there was victory in a couple of areas. There were some other issues that, we wish that they would have addressed that were very important. But thankfully there were some small victories there. I think the point of that segment, which I really appreciate you sharing that story, is don't be afraid to pursue it. Be aware of some of these issues that you might run into, but it is always worth going through that process. It's hard, but you can make changes for your entire community when you do that. And so I'm glad that you went through all that effort, Kate, because it benefited more than just you. All right, Lindsey, why don't you talk to us about the power of numbers when agitating for positive change in the world, whether that be in your school division, the Department of Education, or even the state legislature?
Yes. So I think that one of the biggest things that really stood out to me through most of my IEP journey was how incredibly isolating it was. I felt like I was a lone, agitator, trying to get my child provided services that I could see that he needed. The school agreed that he needed, but it was still just a multi-year fight with so much learning loss. And it was, heartbreaking, made me super angry. And there just, has to be a better way, because I know that I'm not the only one. And I know that there are pretty significant systems changes that need to happen at a lot of different levels to improve the situation. And so for a lot of families. And so kind of as an aside, after COVID, I was part of a class action lawsuit against the Governor Attorney General office and VDOE to allow certain masking requirements for students that had disabilities protected by the ADA. And it was the only successful class action lawsuit that was brought under the ADA. And I was really, through that process, I was really proud of being with a group of parents pushing for changes that actually ended up benefiting any child that has protections under ADA in Virginia to be able to have certain masking requirements. And so I think that the greatest takeaway from that was that if you can band together with parents, whether it's through legal action or just to have somebody there, to have an extra set of eyes to help support you through your process through the system, please do that, whether it be through Facebook groups or reaching out to us who are on the panel. Just having someone who's been through the process before is immensely helpful. On top of that, I'm also going to put a plug in. If you're super frustrated with the system, run for office. Our current board of supervisors, who approves the entire general operating and capital improvement plan for our county, which I think is the 5th largest county in Virginia, has 0 women on it, and doesn't have, people who have been through certain processes. And so women are, historically the ones that do a lot of the emotional kind of labor that goes into all of these processes, but we're not represented at the local, state, or federal level enough. And so I'm running for office myself locally, and want to see a bunch of changes happen. But even if that's not your jam, start attending your school board meetings, start going to your board of supervisors meetings, your city council meetings, start dialogues with your General Assembly members. These are the people who can enact change. And if it's not, something that you want to do where you want to run yourself, but that you're not alone, and that your child needs help, funding will go a long way. way, programming will go a long way. And these are the people that you need to be having these conversations with to make sure that that not only happens for you and your kids, but families across your district and the state. So don't be afraid to, be a resistor and an agitator. And I know it's time consuming, and that's the most difficult part of that, because like you only have so much energy that you can put into things. And when you're in kind of a foxhole fighting for your child or your family, it can be hard to do additional advocacy, but ultimately and unfortunately that is how our system is set up. And so you got to be loud to more than just one or two people. You got to be loud to people who have the power to make the changes.
Yep, absolutely, Lindsey. And I love that you are walking the walk, not just talking the talk, by getting involved yourself. And absolutely, when we run into these challenges, if we can network and reach out to other families and find out who else is, facing the same challenges we are, and then we advocate together, whether that's at our local school board or all the way up to the state, it makes a massive difference when we band together with other people who have shared experiences. We all tell our stories. We get our local, our legislators involved, and we can ultimately make changes for everybody. So absolutely, thank you for sharing that experience, Lindsey. Okay, so last but not least, Kate, tell us about the importance of having a solid transition plan in place for your child and why it is important to coordinate with community services such as DARS or others. And tell us real fast what, DARS is and other community services you think might benefit.
Okay. I will do that. Hi, this is Kate. I do want to say one thing, just to go back to what Lindsey was saying. I was feeling very alone with my first child and was, desperate to find, my tribe. So I did reach out, did a Google search. At the time, my son was diagnosed with Asperger's. So I said Asperger's Richmond support and found one person. And between she and I now, we created a group, and our group now at this point, however many years later, we have almost 700 members in it. So it's been amazing. And it's a really great way to, if you can't find support in other groups, start a group. Right. Same as Lindsey, run for office. If you're not seeing it, do it, Anyway, so I want to talk about transition. My oldest one, 23, started his transition at 14. And in Virginia, as Susanna pointed out in her slide, transition begins at age 14 in Virginia, which is a good thing for kids with disabilities because it takes longer to get into the process and to really hone what their goals will look like and what that transition will look like. The state agency that works with schools and with what they call clients, which are the kids and the young adults and the adults that they work with, is called DARS, and that's the Department for Aging and Rehabilitative Services. And I will put the link in if somebody else is not putting it in here when I finish. So beginning at age 14 and continuing until graduation, the student's IEP has information in it about transition services, what their goals are, what they think they would like to do after graduation. This could be, my son would like to go to a 2-year college and then transfer to a 4-year college, or perhaps they want to go to a vocational training program, or maybe they just they think that they're going to start working when they get out of school. So this is what's written into the IEP. And this is the goal that is once when the child is reaching graduation, this is the transition is supposed to be as seamless as possible to go from high school to life. Of course, it's never as easy as all of that, but that's the idea anyway. For DARS, my oldest son was, when he applied at his local DARS office to be a client, and he was given a case manager, and the case manager was really great, and she worked with the school. Every high school in Virginia, this is mandated through state code, has a faculty member who acts as the transition coordinator. So the case manager from DARS worked with the transition coordinator to help define what his goals were and what he wanted to do. He, through DARS, and he's still in school, he got a job. He started working at a Kroger as a bagger. He had somebody there some of the time as a job coach. So just kind of making sure that he was doing okay with the job, that, if he needed help talking to the employer, the job coach was there, and this was only a couple of times. And eventually he said, I don't need that person there. They make me feel weird. So the job coach was pulled back. He stayed with the job for about 6 months until, he was still in school. And he said, I can't do both anymore. So he put in his notice, but he is still at 23. He's still a DARS client. Once he became 18, he transitioned from the juvenile case management to adult management. And what is developed through DARS, we've been talking about IEPs, but they create what's called an IPE, which is an individual plan for employment. And again, it's just taking into account what are the goals. Do you want to go to school? Do you want to higher education, a vocational training program? Do you want to have a job? And then all the things that are needed for that. Do you need resume help building your resume? Do you need help with job coaching or vocational assessments? This is what DARS does, even when you're in school and then once you're out of school. One thing that we have discovered over this journey is that sometimes even like with school and IEPs, IPEs, the individual plan for employment, is not great and needs some help. So his last IPE was lacking some things, and we weren't really feeling like we were getting what we needed from his DARS case manager. So we had to go to the Disability Law Center, which has a program called the Client Assistance Program, CAP program. And we got this amazing advocate. Advocates are great, everybody. Advocates are awesome. But we got an amazing advocate who worked with us with DARS on making him get this really robust and great IPE. So I just wanted to give a plug out for that, because once you start this journey, and I know some people who have young kids, and it really is hard to see that far in advance, but it will happen. Just keep this on your radar and know that this is available to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kate and Lindsey, both of you, for sharing such wisdom and all of your experiences. Lindsey, why don't you go ahead and throw up your slide that you were going to share at the end. Lindsey put together this great slide with some resources on it, with our email addresses also. And again, if you want to reach out to any of us, please feel free and go ahead and jot down any of these resources that you might need that could help. We actually only had one question come through the chat, and so I'll address it real quick. The question was, how do you hold schools accountable for not following the IEP? And to be honest, this question made me chuckle a little, because I thought that is the ultimate question that all of us go through when we approach this process. Unfortunately, there is not a simple answer. The broad answer is that, well, that is why there are Supreme Court cases that change the laws in regard to special education and, all legislation across the board. But the goal is to not ever have to get to the point where you have to file a lawsuit. Sometimes that is, absolutely necessary, and that is the only way to get schools to be accountable to what this legal document says. The step below that is to hire an advocate to go into meetings with you, and who knows what an IEP should look like, who knows what the entire process is, who knows what your rights are, what your child's rights are, and can really help you craft the kind of IEP that your child needs. And then follow through with data, with test scores, with, grades, yes, with goals, and making sure those goals are measurable, to make sure that the school is following through, that your child is actually making that measurable progress from the IEP. But again, ideally, parents shouldn't have to hire advocates either, because this is just what the schools are supposed to be doing. And so the more you are able to educate yourself going into this process, you yourself will be able to hold schools accountable for what's happening in that process. Unfortunately, there's not a simple answer to this question, because the entire reason special education advocates are necessary, the entire reason lawsuits get filed, is because sometimes schools do not follow your child's IEP. So it's not a simple answer. With each individual case, we, as a parent in my daughter's situation, and then also in an advocate as I represent other families, I just take every case as an individual situation, and I dig away at all the details. I try to develop really good relationships with the school team and of course with the family, and I just work at every detail of that IEP until it's crafted in a way that it ought to be. And then I listen to the parents, and we look at test scores, and we look at everything that comes back from the student to see if the school is following through on everything. And so again, there's not a simple answer because it's different for everyone. If you have questions, if you need more assistance or help, I'm always happy to answer questions. Thank you. Oh, sorry, Taylor, you go right ahead. I was just gonna wrap up. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending.
This has been fantastic. Sorry about that. We have to wrap up, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.